Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The hard sell is really on now from Tyson Fury's team and ESPN in regards to Tyson Fury's upcoming fight with undefeated German fringe contender Tom Schwarz 24-0 on June 15th. Now, this was announced from what I would say, from gathering sort of a bit of reaction around the place and sort of watching what's gone down online, hasn't gone down terribly well with most boxing fans. Sure, Fury fans aren't too fussed about this, that some are even defending this as a very good opponent and trying to make out that Tom Schwarz, who hasn't got any contender level wins, let alone step up level wins, that he's on a par with Dominic Breazeale and Jarrell Miller. And I'll come to that later, but there's been the hard sell going on by ESPN, Tim Bradley in particular, and also Ben Davison. And we'll start with Ben Davison because he's made some really interesting comments that I wanted to just touch on and just expand upon. And then on to Tim Bradley and some wider thoughts on this whole issue. So talking to IFL TV, and this is subsequently reported by BoxingScene.com, see here on screen, Davison saying, "You can't win, can you? A few names got sent across and we had a look. We don't want to make the adjustment of somebody big, in brackets in size, to somebody small, to have a go back to somebody big, because the other two elite fighters that we're looking to make fights with are obviously 6'6" plus. That was a criteria. That we wanted somebody big, we wanted somebody in the top 5, and who have you got?" Davison told IFL TV. Kubrat Pulev is mandatory for Joshua and is obviously in line for a big payday. Rivas is 6 foot. Dillian Whyte is in a position where he's discussing with ESPN, Fox, Sky, DAZN, which puts him in a position where we don't know whether he's coming or going. Miller's taken up by Joshua. Breazeale's taken up by Wilder. Tom Schwarz is number 2 with the WBO, also number 9 with the IBF, so he's ranked in the top 10 with 2 organisations. When the fight got sent to us as well, he was ranked number 11 on Boxrec, but all of a sudden that got changed. In brackets, he's now 42nd. We're not trying to make a career of avoiding the big uns because Tyson is the one who jumped up and took the fight with Wilder, when really he shouldn't have. Tyson's shown that he'll always step up to the mark and take the risk. He went to Klitschko's backyard, Wilder's backyard. Who else has done that? When you discuss them about coming to us, the conversation goes dead. That's Ben Davison talking to IFL TV. Quite a bit to touch on there, and this sort of Tom Schwarz, and you can sort of see where the fix is in here with they're looking at the rankings, they were looking at Boxrec, and they're obviously looking to the market in the United States, this new network, this co-promotional deal with ESPN. Who looks good on paper? Who's got an undefeated record? Who's big? Who's strong? Who looks like a guy that we could sell to the public? And effectively, what is a mismatch on paper, at least, because it is. But who can we do a number on to sell this to the fans? And obviously, they've come up with Tom Schwarz. And you may recall, ahead of the Deontay Wilder fight, Ben Davison made it known he didn't want Tyson Fury taking that fight. He even said to him, "Don't take this fight." But obviously Fury, he did take it, and he ended up acquitting himself well. And in many people's eyes, including my own, he won that fight. But going from that to Tom Schwarz, there is a massive step down in class there. And, recent videos that I've done, I've outlined that. So I'm not going to really go through that again, but you can see what they were looking to do with some of these comments here. They're looking at the rankings going, okay, well, this has got, 2 top 10 rankings in 2 organizations. And he referred there to number 11 on Boxrec, but this is now 42nd. And it would have been a very similar sales pitch in regards to the Boxrec stuff as Eddie Hearn used for Jarrell Miller versus Thomas Adamek. And that was clearly a mismatch from when it was announced. And at that time, Thomas Adamek was, I think it was 14th on Boxrec. And the way that Eddie Hearn and co tried to pitch that was Thomas Adamek, 14th on Boxrec, this guy's a legend, yada, 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 and trying to really give it the big one. But we all knew how that was going to go, and Thomas Adamek, was dispatched within a couple of rounds. This isn't quite as big a mismatch as that Thomas Adamek and Jarrell Miller, because a 41-year-old Thomas Adamek had no place being in there with a legitimate top 10 contender in Jarrell Miller. Whereas, Tom Schwarz, he is on the rise, but he hasn't gone through all those gears you would expect a fringe contender to get to before facing a guy of Tyson Fury. And I think there's a number of people who take my criticism of this fight way too to heart, because it's not about criticizing Tyson Fury, it's about criticizing the fight. He is just too far above Tom Schwarz, where this just isn't credible enough for him to be taking. But from what you are hearing from Ben Davison, they had some say in this opponent selection. It wasn't just ESPN and Bob Arum. They've clearly had a look at the options and weighed in on this. So some of this has to be on, Ben Davison, Tyson Fury, Frank Warren and co, that they've actually had a hand in this fight. And it's been quite interesting, actually, because when this was announced, it was done on the broadcast of a fight night on BT Sports, but there wasn't the sort of normal fanfare that would accompany the sort of announcement for this type of fight. Obviously, this is the first fight on Tyson Fury's ESPN co-promotional deal. ESPN didn't put out a big press release announcing this, and actually neither did Frank Warren. And you go to his website, there's nothing there. ESPN, they didn't put out a big press release as they normally would, because they send them out like clockwork. And there was nothing for that. The only thing, so here is Frank Warren, recent news. Nothing about Tyson Fury's fight. I found that interesting. ESPN didn't send anything out, but then you had Tyson Fury's management company, MTK Global. They had this press release come out. So this is the promo for this. They don't even have Schwartz in it. And then they have this very threadbare press release with a couple of quotes. This is obviously taken from the television interview, and very little else. I was just really surprised how little detail there was to announce what really is, even though it's Tom Schwarz and this is a mismatch of sorts, Tyson Fury is regarded as one of the biggest and best names in the heavyweight division, and it's just so little fanfare associated with it. But perhaps that is related to the backlash that they knew that they were going to get for taking this level of opposition. It is the first fight. Effectively, it's a showcase fight of sorts to make Tyson Fury look good against a guy who's, big and burly, but ultimately Tyson Fury's going to take him to school, and probably the goal here is to make him look good and then build him into a bigger fight the next time around, and ultimately into a Deontay Wilder rematch, and no guarantees that happens. It's quite interesting. Deontay Wilder doesn't like to be dictated to, and there's been a number of things said in recent days that have talked about, we'll look to do this and that and this, that and the other at this point and then, and all this sort of thing. And it just made me think, it's deja vu with Wilder, because he hates to be dictated to and feel like he's on someone else's clock and that they're dictating his career. And I was thinking, the goalpost that they're sort of setting for this sort of thing, it's probably just going to, eventually evaporate, because Deontay Wilder won't play ball with Tyson Fury. I'm sure Deontay Wilder is very bitter about what happened. And Fury himself had said in the broadcast on BT the other night that Wilder isn't returning his messages, his, texts, his emails, or whatever communication he's been getting in touch with him on. He's just getting blanked right now. So it kind of, for me at least, there's going to be a bit of there'll have to be a thawing in relations before anything happens. And more likely, they're going to have to sort of cede to some of Wilder's demands, because that seems to be the sort of play that Wilder, Finkel, Showtime, Al Heyman, that they're trying to run at the moment, trying to get people to come into their tent as opposed to going into anyone else's. So yeah, that rematch, I just don't hold much hope that it's going to happen. But it was interesting. If you caught the Kubrat Pulev fight, the ESPN broadcast of it, Tim Bradley was on there, and it was super cringeworthy. It really was. What he actually said about this fight was Tom Schwarz was 6'6", and I'll just, edit there. He's actually 6'5.5". There is, a bit of a difference, but 6'6", and he goes, guess who else is about that height? Deontay Wilder. And then he went on to say, Tom Schwarz has got a right hand, and guess who also has got a right hand? Deontay Wilder. And these correlations between, similar height and Tom Schwarz having a right hand, and he's not really noted for being a big puncher. It just, to me, was laughable at the time, and I was just like, what the hell? It's like company man Tim Bradley Honestly, it was disgraceful, and it was, he really should give him an uppercut for trying to draw parallels between Schwartz and Wilder. Sure, Deontay Wilder probably doesn't have the sort of technical ability that Tom Schwarz does, because Deontay Wilder is a right hand, some athleticism, and little else. But, there is still a gulf in the record, the class, the opposition. Tom Schwarz really hasn't fought nobody at no time. And this number 2 ranking, which they're sort of, really pegging this to in the WBO, trying to call him a top 5 heavyweight in the world. That in itself is quite ironic, given he's on Boxrec, which they were going to allude to as him being the 11th and then subsequently dropped to 42nd. On Boxrec, Tom Schwarz is the number 5 heavyweight in Germany, but somehow he's the number 2 heavyweight in the world. So, these rankings, they are very hilarious at times, but as I mentioned in my first video when I said, is Tyson Fury going to cherry pick Tom Schwarz? He's been in the WBO rankings for 3 solid years now and really still hasn't had those proper step-up fights you would have expected by now. And that does sort of lead to the question, was he just trying to pad his record out until he got a big payday? Because there's a number of guys within those rankings that you can sort of look at and go, okay, well, that certainly looks to be the case for them. One of them is Kyotaru Fujimoto. And, he's been facing former middleweights and all that sort of stuff. He's also ranked in a couple of sanctioning bodies, or has been in a couple of sanctioning bodies in recent months, still in the WBO. So it's kind of, there's a number of those guys floating around waiting to be plucked and beaten by other guys who are clearly a cut above, and this is an instance of this. And if we go to the to Tom Schwarz's record here, so now he's 42nd on Boxrec, and I would just note on that, so periodically Boxrec do an update where they sort of update their algorithm to account for certain factors. It's not all made public, but effectively, the reason why they do that is, like any system, it can be gamed. And these adjustments and balancing that they do it so then the rankings aren't lopsided. I mean, a couple of months ago, you had Thomas Adamek within the top 20. In the top 15, you had Marco Huck, who was 15th. And these guys, mostly for most of their career, a lot of the points they'd gained were down at cruiserweight. So some of that had carried over. But some of the wins that they'd had, or more notable wins at heavyweight, were several years ago. So they do some adjustments over time to account for certain factors, and that's why at some points, guys end up falling like a stone. A recent example was Junior Farr, the New Zealander. He was about 55th or 60th, somewhere in that range, after this update that they recently did, because of some of the opposition that he'd faced, the caliber of opposition. He dropped down to, it was about 120th. So there are those massive falls, and it tries to guard against gaming the system to get points, to get, obviously higher up the rankings. And if you look over to the right here, the caliber of the fight. So they're saying that this fight with Fury, it's a 3-star fight. And the majority of, just got a siren going past here. So the majority of the fights here, 1-star, 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 no star, mostly 1-star, the odd 2-star thrown in there. So it sort of tells you something about the level of the opposition. But the actual heavyweight division is rather thin in terms of talent. So there will be, even for the guys who are better, a number of, pretty poor fights on their resume when you look through it. It's only when they start to really step up to a higher level that they get to the 2, 3, 4-star level. But this is rated as a 3-star event. But on the rankings, at 42 is Tom Schwarz right now. And Fujimoto, who I mentioned before, who's been facing former middleweights and such, he is 1 place below. And the guy above him is Trevor Bryan, is the WBA interim world title holder. And he won his title last year against former cruiserweight BJ Flores, and the 2 guys who he fought before that had over 40 losses between them. So it kind of tells you with the guys, some of the company that he's keeping, like Trevor Bryan and Fujimoto, who have been facing basically Neville nobodies, that kind of, does weigh up a little bit where Tom Schwarz has been having his competition, especially for guys who've got around 20, 24 fights here. Whereas some of these other prospects where you go further up, Joe Joyce, Filip Hrgovic, they've got 7 and 8 fights respectively. They're inside the top 20 with, a third of the fights that Tom Schwarz has had. So what Boxrec is saying about the level of opposition that they've faced compared to Tom Schwarz, who's had 3 times as many fights, is that it far outstrips who Schwartz has been facing. So that just gives you an indication of the poor level of opposition that Schwartz has been actually up against, mostly domestic level opposition in Germany. He's not really at European level yet. But it is what it is now, and this will be my last video really sort of laying into this, but it's been interesting to see the response and people's reaction to it, and most people aren't happy with it. And some of those that are really deluding themselves that this is actually a good fight, trying to say that Brazil and Miller and Schwartz are on the same level. No, Schwartz is 1 or 2 cuts below them. They've actually had contender level fights. They've actually had the step ups where you get to a certain point in your career. And Dominic Brazil is ranked 10th by Boxrec. Jarrell Miller 6th by Boxrec. Sure, some of their opposition hasn't always been the best. Miller has been fighting a couple of cans recently, a rinsed Thomas Adamek and an overmatched Bogdan Dinu. But, you know, he does have some other step-up fights, Washington, and Duopa in 2017 and 2018 that you can kind of go, well, he may not be the best opponent for Anthony Joshua, but he's had some fights. It wasn't a fight that we wanted to see, and I criticised that heavily when it was made because it really was 4th cab off the rank in terms of what fight fans wanted. But, you know, to try put that in the same ballpark as Schwartz and Fury, it's laughable. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.